Jacob Cole stood on that platform with $200 burning a hole in his vest pocket, the money that was supposed to save a dying child, the money he'd gotten by buying a wife he didn't want. But when he walked into his house that night and saw Brennan's hand twisted in Eleanor's hair, blood running from her nose, he realized something had changed. This wasn't about a transaction anymore, this was about family. And Jacob Cole would burn the whole world down before he let Shaw's men take that from him. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's go back to where it all started. Back to the morning when Billy Cole was dying and Jacob had to make a choice that would change everything. Billy Cole was 7 years old when he learned that silence could save your life. The fever had started 3 days ago, burning through his small body like prairie fire through dry grass. Now he lay in the back room of his uncle's ranch house, too weak to cry, barely strong enough to breathe. Jacob Cole stood in the doorway watching the boy's chest rise and fall in shallow, desperate movements. The same way Rose had breathed. The same way she'd looked 3 years ago, right before everything ended. He cut the thought off like a dying calf. Couldn't go there, not now. The boy needed medicine. Medicine cost money. Money Jacob didn't have. The banknote was due in 12 days. Raymond Shaw had made it clear as spring water, pay up or lose the ranch. Every acre, every building, every memory Sarah and Rose had left behind. And now Billy was dying. Jacob crossed the room in 3 strides, knelt beside the narrow bed. The boy's skin burned like a branding iron under his calloused palm. Too hot, far too hot. He'd seen this before. Diphtheria maybe. Or scarlet fever. Either way, without medicine, without a real doctor, Billy had maybe 2 days left. The thought hit Jacob like a mule kick to the chest. He'd already buried a daughter, buried a wife. He'd stood in the cemetery outside Millerton with dirt under his fingernails and rage in his throat, promising God he'd never feel that helpless again. He'd broken a lot of promises in his 35 years, but not that one, never that one, until now. Jacob stood, moved to the window. Dawn was breaking over the Texas plains, painting everything the color of old blood. September of 1882, and the land was as unforgiving as it had ever been. Drought had killed the grass, heat had dried the creek to a trickle, and debt was killing everything else. Behind him, Billy made a sound, not quite a moan, not quite a cry, just a weak exhale that spoke of suffering without words. If Billy died, Jacob knew he wouldn't survive it. Not this time. A man could only lose so much before the losses started taking pieces of his soul he couldn't get back. He'd lost Sarah to grief and illness, lost Rose to a disease he couldn't afford to treat properly, lost his brother to whiskey and a bad horse 3 months back. Billy was all that remained of his bloodline, all that remained of hope. The boy had to live, which meant Jacob needed $200, today. He walked to the kitchen, pulled open the drawer where he kept his papers, bank statements all marked in red, notices from Shaw's collectors, letters he'd never answered, and at the bottom, crumpled but still readable, an advertisement he'd torn from the Millerton Gazette 6 months ago. Mail-order brides wanted, respectable women seeking marriage and partnership in the great state of Texas. Interested parties contact Reverend William Harwick, Union Church, Millerton. Jacob had read it a dozen times since Sarah died. Always told himself he'd never be that desperate, never be the kind of man who ordered a wife like seed corn from a catalog. Sarah deserved better than to be replaced by some stranger who'd look at his empty house and see only failure. But Sarah was dead. Rose was dead. And Billy was dying. The advertisement had a line at the bottom he'd never paid attention to before. Completion bonus for suitable matches, $200 upon successful placement. $200, enough for medicine, enough to pay Doc Morrison, enough to buy Billy 3 more days, maybe 4, until the fever broke, or didn't. Jacob's hand closed around the paper. It crumpled in his fist, the sound loud in the silent kitchen. He thought about what he was considering. Taking a wife he didn't want, bringing a stranger into his home, lying to her about why, using her for money while a child died in the back room. It was the kind of thing a desperate man did, the kind of thing a man did when he'd run out of choices and dignity both. Jacob Cole was that man now. He smoothed the paper flat on the table, reread the details. Selection day was today, Saturday, September 16th. The women would arrive on the noon train, be presented at the depot by 2 in the afternoon. Any interested man could attend, make his selection, and complete the arrangement before sundown. The advertisement promised that Reverend Harwick maintained the highest standards. All women were of good character. All had been screened for suitability. All were prepared for the rigors of frontier life. Jacob almost laughed at that last part. Nobody was prepared for the rigors of frontier life. You just survived it or you didn't. He glanced at the clock on the mantel. 6 in the morning. The depot was 20 miles northeast. If he left now, rode hard, he could make it by 1:30. Select a woman. Any woman. Get the $200 from Harwick. Ride back with the medicine before midnight. Billy would live. The woman would have a home. And Jacob would have sold whatever remained of his soul for the life of a child who called him uncle, but felt like a son. Fair trade. He moved back to Billy's room, knelt beside the bed again. The boy's eyes were closed, his breathing ragged. Jacob placed his hand on the small forehead, felt the fire raging beneath the skin. Hang on, he thought. Just hang on a little longer. By noon, Jacob was in the saddle, riding toward Millerton, with the kind of focus that came from knowing a child's life hung in the balance of speed and distance. The sun hammered down from a sky the color of bleached bone. His horse, a gray mare named Ash, moved steady beneath him, hooves throwing up dust that settled on everything like a shroud. He'd left Billy with Doc Morrison in town, paying the old physician $5 he couldn't afford to watch over the boy until Jacob returned. Doc had taken one look at Billy's fever, then at Jacob's face, and hadn't asked questions. Just nodded, accepted the money, and promised to do what he could. But Doc's medicines were old. His treatments were basic. What Billy needed was something stronger, something that cost real money. The kind of money Jacob hadn't seen in 3 years. The landscape rolled past in shades of brown and gray. Dead grass stretched to the horizon. Cattle skulls marked the trail where others had tried and failed to survive the drought. A buzzard circled overhead, patient as judgment. Jacob didn't let himself think about what he was doing, didn't let himself consider the woman he was about to select like livestock at auction, didn't let himself feel anything except the steady rhythm of the horse beneath him and the ticking clock in his head. Billy's clock, the one counting down to death or salvation. By the time he reached the outskirts of Millerton, the sun was directly overhead. The town looked like it always did, a single main street lined with false front buildings, a church with a crooked steeple, and the depot at the eastern edge, where the railroad had brought civilization and disappointment in equal measure. Jacob could hear the crowd before he saw it. Voices carried on the hot wind, laughter, the kind of ugly laughter that came when men gathered to watch something they found amusing in a cruel sort of way. He guided Ash toward the depot, dismounted at the hitching post. The crowd was thick around the platform. Maybe 50 men, all pressed close, all talking at once. Jacob pushed through them, ignoring the complaints until he reached the front. 10 women stood on the platform under a canvas awning that provided exactly no shade. They were arranged in a line like goods for inspection. Some looked frightened. Others looked determined. A few looked like they regretted every decision that had led them to this moment. Reverend William Harwick stood at the center of the platform, mopping his face with a yellowed handkerchief. He was a round man in his 50s with thinning hair and the perpetually nervous expression of someone who'd promised more than he could deliver. He was speaking, his voice carrying over the crowd with practiced authority. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "fine women here. Everyone trained in the domestic arts. Miss Catherine from Pennsylvania. She can read, write, and cipher like a school teacher." A rancher with silver threading through his temples stepped forward, helped Miss Catherine down from the platform. The blonde woman smiled prettily, her relief visible as morning dew. She'd been chosen. She'd escaped whatever past had driven her here. 1 down, 9 to go. Jacob scanned the remaining women with the cold assessment of a man buying a horse. He wasn't looking for beauty or grace or any of the things that had drawn him to Sarah. He was looking for someone sturdy, someone practical, someone who wouldn't ask too many questions about why he needed a wife so urgently. His gaze moved past the younger women, the ones who stood with their chins high and their hopes higher. Those would want romance, would want promises, would expect things Jacob couldn't give. He focused instead on the woman at the far end of the line. She stood apart from the others not physically but in every other way that mattered. While the others fidgeted or smiled nervously at the crowd, this woman stood perfectly still. Her eyes were fixed on some point beyond the depot, beyond the town, maybe beyond Texas itself. She wore a brown dress that had seen better days. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun. Her hands were clasped in front of her tight enough that the knuckles showed white. Jacob recognized that stance. He'd stood that way himself. It was the posture of someone enduring, someone who'd learned that showing weakness only made the wolves circle closer. Harwick continued his presentation, each woman stepping down as men claimed them like prizes. The crowd grew louder with each selection, making jokes Jacob didn't find funny. Comments about which woman would make the best cook, the best mother, the best warming body on a cold night. Jacob watched the woman in brown. She didn't react to any of it, didn't flinch when the jokes turned crude, didn't cry when the crowd's attention shifted to her like a spotlight she couldn't escape. By the time Harwick reached her in his introductions, only 3 women remained, then 2, then just her. The crowd's laughter changed quality, became meaner. Someone shouted something about returned merchandise. Another voice agreed loud enough to carry, "Got to be something wrong with that one if she's here a second time around." Harwick shuffled his papers, clearly uncomfortable. He cleared his throat, tried again. "Now Miss Harper here, she's experienced in household management. Proven track record of—" The laughter swelled, cutting him off. Someone in the back called out, "Experienced at what?" Harwick. Disappointing her first husband, Jacob saw it then. The moment the woman's control almost broke, her hands clenched tighter and tiny drops of blood appeared where her nails bit into her palms. But her face remained smooth. Her eyes stayed fixed on that distant point. She didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. Jacob had been ready to pick any woman, the first one available, the easiest transaction. Get the money, get back to Billy. That was the plan. But something about the way this woman stood alone while the world mocked her changed his calculation. He knew what it meant to be the last one standing, to have everyone look at you with pity or contempt, or that particular mixture of both that said you were less than nothing. He'd felt that way at Sarah's funeral, at Rose's, when the whole town had watched him lower his family into the ground and just knew that he'd failed them somehow, that a better man would have saved them, a richer man, a stronger man. He'd hated that feeling, hated the watchers, hated himself for caring what they thought. This woman didn't deserve that hate. She'd done nothing except have the bad luck to be unchosen, to be unwanted. And the crowd was feeding on her humiliation like vultures on a carcass. Jacob moved before he'd fully decided to move. His boots struck the wooden platform with deliberate force, each step loud enough to cut through the laughter. The crowd noticed, went quiet, turned to see who'd dared interrupt their entertainment. He stopped 3 feet from the woman, didn't look at her face, not yet, looked instead at her hands, at the blood welling from her palms, at the way she stood like a fence post driven into hard ground, refusing to bend no matter how hard the wind blew. Harwick stammered, "Mr. Cole, I didn't think you— I wasn't aware." "This one," Jacob said. His voice carried across the silent depot flat and final. "We're going." The woman's head turned. For the first time since he'd started watching her, she looked directly at something in the present moment, at him. Her eyes were the color of deep water in winter, clear and cold and surprised. The silence that followed was complete as church prayer. Even the wind seemed to stop. Harwick recovered first, shuffling his papers with renewed energy. "Well, yes, of course. But Mr. Cole, I feel obligated to inform you of certain circumstances regarding Miss Harper's previous marriage and subsequent—" "Don't need to know," Jacob interrupted. His eyes never left the woman's face. "I need someone who can work. Can you work?" She blinked, seemed to realize he was actually addressing her as a person rather than merchandise. Her voice came out rough, like she hadn't used it in days. "Yes. Cook?" Yes. Wash clothes. Yes. Know which end of a chicken lays eggs. Something flickered in her expression. Not quite amusement, but close. The back end generally. Then we're good. Jacob turned to Harwick. Papers and payment. But Sir Harwick tried again. You really should understand that Miss Harper cannot. I said, I don't need to know. Jacob's voice had gone cold enough to frost glass. Whatever problems she had with her last husband are between them and God. I need a partner for the ranch. Someone who pulls their weight, that's all. He looked back at the woman. What's your name, Eleanor? She said. Eleanor Harper. Jacob Cole. He didn't offer his hand, didn't smile, just nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement rather than welcome. You coming or staying here? Eleanor's throat worked as she swallowed. Her gaze went past Jacob to the crowd, to the faces still staring at them both like they were the day's entertainment, then back to Jacob's face, searching for something, maybe for cruelty, maybe for the trap she'd learned men always set. Whatever she saw seemed to satisfy her, or maybe she was just as desperate as he was. I'm coming, she said. Jacob nodded again, descended the platform. Behind him he heard Eleanor's footsteps, slower than his, hesitant, but following. The crowd parted like he carried plague. Nobody spoke. Nobody laughed now. They just watched with confused expressions as Jacob Cole, the man who'd sworn off women after Sarah died, walked away with the bride nobody else wanted. Harwick caught up with them before they reached Jacob's horse. He was breathless, clutching a leather portfolio. Papers, he gasped. Need signatures. Both of you. Jacob took the papers, scanned them without really reading. Standard marriage contract. Names, dates, witnesses. At the bottom, a line about payment. Completion bonus $200 upon successful placement and consummation of marriage contract. Jacob's jaw tightened. He'd forgotten that part. Or maybe he'd chosen not to remember. The $200, he said to Harwick. When upon completion, Harwick repeated clearly, uncomfortable. The terms require that the marriage be, that is properly entered into, not just a legal arrangement, but a, when Jacob repeated, his voice hard. Harwick swallowed. The arrangement states within 1 month, but some flexibility can be. Jacob signed his name, thrust the paper at Eleanor. She took it with shaking hands, read it more carefully than he had. Her face went pale when she reached the consummation clause, but she signed anyway. What choice did she have? Harwick produced a smaller paper, this one a bank draft, $200 payable immediately. He handed it to Jacob like he was relieved to be done with the transaction. Jacob folded it, tucked it into his vest pocket, felt the weight of it there. $200. Billy's life purchased with a lie, because he knew, even as he accepted the money, that he had no intention of honoring the consummation clause, no intention of making Eleanor Harper his wife in any way that mattered. She'd get a room with a lock. She'd get respect and distance. She'd get exactly what he'd promised, work in exchange for shelter. The $200 was a loan he'd pay back somehow, eventually. When Billy was well and the debt to Shaw was settled and life stopped being a series of emergencies requiring moral compromises. He mounted Ash, then looked down at Eleanor. She stood beside the horse, her small carpet bag clutched in both hands, looking up at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Can you ride?" he asked. "A little." "Good enough." He extended his hand. She hesitated, then took it. Her palm was warm despite the cool determination in her eyes. He pulled her up behind him, felt her settle onto Ash's back with the careful balance of someone unfamiliar with horses but unwilling to show weakness. "Hold on," he said. "We've got a long ride." Her arms came around his waist, tentative at first, then firmer when Ash started moving. Jacob could feel her breathing against his back, could feel the way she held herself rigid, trying to maintain distance even while pressed close by necessity. They rode in silence through town. Jacob caught glimpses of faces watching from windows, caught the whispers that followed them like dust. By tomorrow, the whole county would know. Jacob Cole took himself a mail-order bride, the barren one, the one nobody wanted. Must be desperate. They'd be right about the desperate part. At the edge of town, Eleanor spoke for the first time since mounting. Her voice was quiet, almost lost under the sound of hoofbeats. Why, Jacob didn't pretend not to understand. He'd asked himself the same question and hadn't liked the answer. But lies required energy he didn't have. "Because you didn't beg," he said, "and because I needed the money." He felt her stiffen behind him, felt the moment she understood the full scope of what had just happened. She'd been purchased, not chosen, not wanted for herself. Just bought because Jacob Cole needed $200 and she'd been standing there available, the last option, on a platform of options. For a long moment he thought she might tell him to stop the horse, might slide down and walk back to town, back to Harwick, back to anywhere that wasn't riding into an uncertain future with a man who just admitted he'd bought her like livestock. Instead, her arms tightened around his waist. Just slightly, barely enough to notice. "What do you need the money for?" she asked. "My nephew Jacob," said. "He's 7, sick with fever. Medicine costs more than I have." Eleanor was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice had changed, still cautious, but with an edge of something else. "Understanding, maybe, or recognition. You're trying to save a child's life." "Yeah." "Then we'd better ride faster." Jacob didn't respond. Couldn't. Something about the way she'd said "we" instead of "you" had lodged in his throat like a stone. He clicked his tongue at Ash, urged the mare into a faster pace. They had miles to cover. And somewhere at the end of them, Billy was fighting for breath. The sun had started its descent toward the horizon by the time they reached Doc Morrison's small house at the edge of Millerton. The building was more shack than house, really. Weathered boards, a sagging porch, windows that hadn't been cleaned since before Jacob was born. But Doc Morrison was the only physician within 50 miles who'd treat you before demanding payment. Jacob dismounted, helped Eleanor down. She stumbled slightly when her feet hit the ground, legs stiff from the long ride. He steadied her with a hand on her elbow, then released her the moment she had her balance. "Wait here," he said, and started toward the door. "No." Eleanor's voice was firm. "If Billy is part of this arrangement, I should meet him." Jacob turned back, studied her. She looked exhausted. Dust covered her brown dress, and strands of hair had escaped her bun. But her chin was up, and her eyes held that same determination he'd seen on the platform. "He's very sick," Jacob said. "Might scare you. I've seen sick before. I've seen death before." Eleanor met his gaze without flinching. "If he's going to be my responsibility too, I should see what I'm walking into." Jacob nodded. Couldn't argue with that logic. He pushed open Doc's door without knocking. The interior was dim and smelled of carbolic acid and old sweat. Doc Morrison looked up from a battered desk in the corner, his rheumy eyes squinting through spectacles held together with wire. "Cole," he said. "Been expecting you back. The boy's stable, but the fever hasn't broken." Jacob crossed to the back room in 3 strides. Billy lay on a narrow cot covered with a thin sheet. His face was flushed with fever, his breathing shallow. But his eyes were open. When he saw Jacob, something like relief flickered across his small face. "Uncle Jake," Billy whispered. His voice was barely audible. Jacob knelt beside the cot, placed his hand on Billy's forehead. Still burning, still too hot, but the boy was conscious. That was something. "I brought medicine money," Jacob said. "And I brought someone." He glanced back toward the door where Eleanor had followed him in. She stood just inside the doorway, taking in the small room, the sick child, the reality of what she'd agreed to without really agreeing to anything. Billy's gaze shifted to Eleanor. For a moment fear crossed his face. Jacob remembered the boy's mother had abandoned him, left in the night with another man, leaving Billy with a father who'd drunk himself to death within a year. Billy had learned to fear women who appeared without warning. "This is Miss Eleanor," Jacob said carefully. "She's going to be staying at the ranch, helping out." Billy didn't respond, just watched Eleanor with the wary eyes of an animal that's been kicked too many times. Eleanor moved slowly, deliberately. She crossed to the cot, knelt down the way Jacob had, but she didn't reach for Billy, didn't try to touch him, just looked at him with an expression Jacob couldn't quite name. "Hello, Billy," she said. Her voice was softer than Jacob had heard it. Gentle. You look like you've been fighting something fierce." Billy's eyes darted to Jacob, seeking permission. Jacob nodded slightly. "Fever," Billy whispered. "Hurts. I bet it does." Eleanor glanced at the water basin on the small table beside the cot. "That water looks warm. Would you like me to get you some cold water?" "Sometimes that helps." Billy considered this, then gave a tiny nod. Eleanor stood, moved to the main room where Doc kept his supplies. Jacob heard her speaking to Doc in low tones, heard the sound of water being poured. She returned a moment later with a clean cloth and a basin of fresh water. She dipped the cloth, wrung it out, then laid it gently across Billy's forehead. The boy's eyes closed at the relief of it. "My grandmother taught me about fevers," Eleanor said quietly. "She was part Cherokee, knew all kinds of remedies the doctors don't learn in books. She—" Indian, Billy asked, eyes still closed. "Some." Eleanor adjusted the cloth. "She said fever is the body's way of fighting, but sometimes the body needs help to win the fight." "Uncle Jake got medicine money," Billy murmured. "I know." Eleanor glanced at Jacob. "Your uncle is a good man." Jacob felt something twist in his chest. He wasn't a good man. A good man wouldn't have bought a wife to save a child. A good man would have found another way. But Eleanor didn't know that yet. Maybe she'd never know. Or maybe she already knew and didn't care because she understood desperation as well as he did. Doc Morrison appeared in the doorway holding a small brown bottle. "This is what you need," he said to Jacob. "Quinine and laudanum. Give him a spoonful every 4 hours. If the fever doesn't break in 2 days, come back." How much Jacob asked, though he already knew the answer would take most of the $200. $50, Doc said. "And that's my friendly price." Jacob produced the bank draft, watched as Doc's eyebrows rose. He'd probably never seen Jacob Cole with more than $5 at once. "I'll need change," Jacob said. Doc nodded, disappeared into the front room, returned with bills and coins, counted out $150, handed it to Jacob with a meaningful look. "Ranch payment coming due?" Doc asked. "Next week. Shaw won't extend again." "I know." Doc glanced at Eleanor, who was still tending to Billy with quiet competence. Then back to Jacob. His expression said he understood more than Jacob had told him. "Sometimes a man does what he has to," Doc said. "No shame in that." Jacob took the medicine bottle, tucked the money into his vest. "Thanks, Doc." They stayed another hour until Billy's fever showed signs of breaking under the influence of the medicine. The boy drifted into something more like real sleep than the restless unconsciousness he'd been trapped in. Eleanor stayed beside him the whole time, changing the cool cloth on his forehead, speaking to him in low, soothing tones when he stirred. Jacob watched her from the doorway, tried to reconcile what he was seeing with what he'd expected. He'd thought he was getting a desperate woman who'd work for her keep and ask nothing in return. Instead, he was seeing someone who knew how to care for a sick child, someone who understood gentleness despite whatever had driven her to stand on that platform in Millerton. By the time they left riding double on Ash with Billy wrapped in a blanket and cradled in Eleanor's arms, full night had fallen. Stars filled the sky from horizon to horizon, so many they cast actual shadows on the ground. Eleanor held Billy, carefully adjusting her grip whenever the horse's gait shifted. The boy slept against her shoulder, his fever-flushed face peaceful for the first time in days. "How far to the ranch?" Eleanor asked. 8 miles, maybe 9. Jacob kept Ash to a steady walk, careful not to jostle Billy more than necessary. "We'll be there by midnight. Tell me about it." Eleanor shifted Billy slightly. "The ranch. Not much to tell. 160 acres, most of it scrub and struggling grass. House has 4 rooms and a lean-to addition I built last month. Barn's solid. Chicken coop needs mending. Creek runs dry this time of year but fills up come winter. Sounds lonely." "It is." Jacob paused. "You'll have your own room. The lean-to. It's got a door that locks, from the inside." He felt Eleanor stiffen slightly. "Why are you telling me that?" "Because I want you to know you're safe." Jacob kept his voice level, factual. "This is a business arrangement. You work, you get shelter and food and respect. Nobody touches you. Nobody comes into your space without permission." Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. Then, "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone who'd demand his rights, who'd see the $200 as payment for more than just work." Jacob's hands tightened on the reins. "Is that what your first husband did?" Eleanor didn't answer. Didn't need to. The silence was answer enough. "I already told you," Jacob said. "I needed the money for Billy. That's all. I don't need a wife in that way. Don't want one. Just need someone who can help me keep this ranch running and keep this boy alive." "What happened to your wife?" Eleanor asked. "Your real wife." Jacob had known the question would come eventually, had prepared himself for it the way he'd prepared himself for everything else since Sarah died, with cold acceptance and minimal emotion. "She died 3 years ago," he said. "Our daughter, too. Diphtheria," the doctor said. "But by the time we could afford to bring the doctor out from the big town, it was too late. They died the same day. Buried them the same day, too." "I'm sorry." "Don't be." Jacob's voice had gone flat. "It happened. It's over. Now there's Billy, and the ranch, and debt. That's all there is." Eleanor shifted Billy again, and the boy murmured something in his sleep. She hushed him gently, then looked up at the stars. "After Sarah died, did you think about leaving, starting over somewhere else every day?" "But the ranch was Sarah's dream. She wanted to build something here, something that lasted. If I left, it'd mean she suffered for nothing. So you stayed. So I stayed." Jacob guided Ash around a cluster of rocks barely visible in the starlight. "And I kept losing pieces of myself to the land and the debt and the memories, until there wasn't much left worth keeping." Eleanor was quiet again. When she spoke, her voice was softer than he'd heard it yet. "I know what that's like, losing pieces, until you're not sure there's anything left but the hollow shape of who you used to be." Jacob glanced back at her. In the starlight, her face looked younger, more vulnerable, less like armor. "Why were you on that platform?" he asked. "What drove you there? The same thing that drives anyone there." "No choices left." Eleanor's arms tightened around Billy. No family, no money, no hope. Just the possibility that somewhere else might be better than nowhere at all. "Was it better?" Jacob asked. "Your first marriage, no. But at least I learned what I was worth to most men." Eleanor's voice had gone hard again. "Nothing, unless I could give them children, and when I couldn't, I became worth less than nothing." Jacob felt anger kindle in his chest, not at her, at the man who taught her that lesson, at the world that measured women in those terms, at the whole system that had led them both to this moment, riding through darkness toward an uncertain future. "You're not worthless," he said, "and you're not nothing. You saved Billy's fever tonight with cold water and patience. That's worth more than gold to me." Eleanor didn't respond, but Jacob felt her posture shift slightly, felt some of the tension ease from her spine. They rode in silence after that. The land rolled past in shades of gray and black. Somewhere in the distance a coyote called. Another answered. The sound carried across the empty miles like a conversation between ghosts. By the time they reached the ranch, Billy was sleeping deeply, his breathing easier than it had been in days. The medicine was working. The fever was breaking. The boy would live. Jacob dismounted first, then helped Eleanor down with Billy still in her arms. The ranch house loomed before them dark, except for the faint glow of the banked stove through the kitchen window. "This is it," Jacob said. "Home." Eleanor looked at the building, took in the weathered boards, the sagging porch rail, the window with a crack running through one pane. Then she looked at Jacob. "It'll do," she said simply. Jacob led them inside, lit the lamp on the kitchen table. The house looked exactly as he'd left it that morning, dishes in the sink, dust on every surface, the pervasive sense of a place slowly dying from lack of care. Eleanor's room, the lean-to, was at the back. Jacob had built it a month ago after he'd decided to respond to Harwick's advertisement. It was small but private. A narrow bed with a corn-shuck mattress, a washstand, hooks for clothes, a window with curtains made from flour sacks, and on both doors, inside and out, the locks he'd promised. Eleanor laid Billy on the bed in the main bedroom, the room that had been Jacob's and Sarah's. She pulled the blanket up to the boy's chin, checked his forehead one more time. "Fever's almost gone," she said. "He'll be all right now. Thanks to you." "Thanks to the medicine you bought?" Eleanor straightened, looked around the room. "This was your wife's room. It was our room. Now it's Billy's. I sleep in the loft above the kitchen. Where will I sleep your room?" "The lean-to." Jacob gestured toward the back door. "But tonight, if you want to stay close to Billy, you can use the spare blanket. Sleep in here. Make sure he doesn't take a turn." Eleanor nodded. That might be best. Jacob showed her where things were. The water pump in the kitchen that sometimes needed priming. The root cellar where he kept potatoes and onions. The smokehouse out back with salt pork and a ham that might still be good. "Chickens are in the coop by the barn," he said. "They'll need feeding at dawn. Grain's in the marked bin. There's eggs most days. I can handle chickens." "Good." Jacob moved toward the door, then stopped. "One more thing." Eleanor turned, waited. "Tomorrow 3 men might show up here. If they do, you call for me. Don't open the door. Don't talk to them. Just call for me, and I'll handle it." "Who are they, men who work for Raymond Shaw? The man I owe money to. They've been coming by regular, making sure I don't forget my debt's due soon. Are they dangerous?" Jacob met her eyes. "They're Shaw's men. That makes them dangerous by default." Eleanor's jaw tightened. She nodded once, understanding passing between them without further words. Jacob climbed the ladder to his loft, lay down on the thin pallet he'd been sleeping on since Sarah died. Below him, he could hear Eleanor moving around the kitchen. The pump squeaked as she drew water. Dishes clinked as she washed them, even though he hadn't asked her to. He stared at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of someone else in his house for the first time in 3 years. It should have felt wrong, should have felt like a violation of the space he'd shared with Sarah. Instead, it just felt less empty. He thought about the $200 folded in his vest pocket. Thought about the lie he'd told by omission when he'd accepted that money. Thought about Eleanor Harper, whose real name he'd have to learn to use instead of thinking of her as the woman nobody wanted. She'd agreed to work. He'd promised her safety. That was the transaction. Clean and simple. Except nothing about it felt clean or simple. Jacob closed his eyes, tried to sleep. But Billy's shallow breathing from the room below kept him awake. And beneath that, the faint sound of Eleanor humming something while she worked. Some tune from a life she'd left behind. He'd paid $50 for the medicine. That left him with $150. He still owed Shaw $400, which meant he was still $350 short even after selling his soul for that $200. But at least Billy was alive. At least the boy would wake up in the morning and see another day. That was worth the price, worth the lie, worth whatever came next. Jacob finally drifted into an uneasy sleep somewhere near dawn. His last conscious thought was of Eleanor's hands clenched so tight on that platform that they'd bled, and how she'd held Billy with those same hands so gentle the boy had finally relaxed into real sleep. She was stronger than anyone had given her credit for, stronger than she probably gave herself credit for, and Jacob Cole had just tied his fate to hers, whether either of them was ready for it or not. Dawn broke cold over the Texas plains, painting the sky in shades of copper and ash. Jacob woke to the sound of chickens complaining, which meant someone had already opened their coop. He climbed down from the loft joints, popping, and found Eleanor in the kitchen with flour on her hands and determination in her eyes. She'd been awake for hours by the look of it. The stove was hot, bread was rising in a bowl, and coffee steamed in the pot Sarah had bought from the Sears catalog 5 years ago. The kitchen smelled like something close to home. Billy Jacob asked, still sleeping. Eleanor didn't look up from the dough she was kneading. Fever broke completely around 4. He woke once, asked for water, went back to sleep. That's a good sign. Jacob poured himself coffee, studying her in the morning light. She'd changed into a different dress, still plain, but cleaner than the one she'd worn yesterday. Her hair was pulled back in that same severe bun, but there were shadows under her eyes that spoke of a sleepless night spent watching over a sick child. "You should have woken me," he said. "You needed sleep." Eleanor shaped the dough into loaves with practiced efficiency. Besides, I've sat with sick children before. I know what to watch for. Before Jacob could ask what she meant, Billy's voice came from the bedroom, weak but clear. "Uncle Jake." Jacob crossed to the room in 3 strides. Billy was sitting up in bed, pale but alert. The fever flush had faded from his cheeks, leaving him looking fragile as old paper. "How do you feel?" Jacob asked, kneeling beside the bed. "Hungry." Billy's stomach growled as if to prove the point. "And my throat don't hurt so much anymore." Relief hit Jacob like a physical blow. The boy was going to live. The medicine had worked. $200 well spent, even if the debt still hung over them like a thundercloud. "Miss Eleanor's making breakfast," Jacob said. "Think you can manage some bread and butter?" Billy nodded, then his gaze shifted to the doorway where Eleanor had appeared. The boy's expression shuddered immediately, that wariness returning. Eleanor noticed. She stayed in the doorway, didn't advance. "Good morning, Billy. I'm glad you're feeling better." Billy didn't answer, just watched her with those careful eyes. Eleanor seemed to understand. She nodded once, then withdrew to the kitchen. Jacob heard her moving around, giving them space. "She ain't leaving," Billy whispered. "No." Jacob helped the boy out of bed, steadied him when his legs wobbled. "She's staying, working on the ranch, like Ma did." The question hit harder than Billy probably intended. The boy's mother had worked the ranch for exactly 3 months before she'd decided a traveling salesman offered better prospects. She'd left in the night, taking what little money Billy's father had saved and leaving nothing but a note that said she couldn't do it anymore. Billy's father had found the bottle after that, and kept finding it until the bottle killed him. "Not like your ma," Jacob said firmly. "Miss Eleanor's different." "How do you know?" "Because she sat up all night making sure you kept breathing." Jacob met Billy's eyes. "Your ma never did that, not once." Billy considered this. Then, "She gonna be my new ma." Jacob felt his throat tighten. "That's not how it works. She's just going to help out, help me keep the ranch running, help take care of you when you're sick. That's all." But that was a lie, wasn't it? Because help taking care of you when you're sick was exactly what a mother did, and Eleanor had already done more mothering in one night than Billy had experienced in his entire 7 years. They made it to the kitchen table where Eleanor had set out plates and fresh bread. The boy ate slowly, carefully, like someone relearning how. Eleanor sat across from them, eating her own breakfast without talking, letting Billy get used to her presence without pressure. Jacob found himself watching her. The way she moved, economical and precise. The way she kept her attention on her food rather than staring at Billy. The way she'd somehow known exactly what the boy needed: space and quiet and the chance to observe before being observed. After breakfast, Eleanor cleared the plates while Jacob helped Billy back to bed. The boy was exhausted from the short trip to the kitchen, his body still recovering from the fever's assault. "Rest," Jacob said. "I've got work to do outside. Miss Eleanor will be here if you need anything." Billy grabbed Jacob's wrist. "Don't go far. I won't. Just checking the stock, mending fence. I'll be close." Billy's grip loosened. He looked past Jacob to where Eleanor was washing dishes at the pump. "She's safe." The question carried weight beyond its simple words. Billy was asking if Eleanor would hurt him, if she'd leave, if she'd prove herself like all the other women in his short, hard life. "Yeah," Jacob said. "She's safe." He hoped he was right. Outside, the morning sun revealed what Jacob had been too exhausted to see in the darkness. 3 of his cattle lay dead in the north pasture, shot and left to rot. Flies already swarmed the carcasses. Buzzards circled overhead, patient and certain. Jacob stood looking at the dead animals, feeling rage kindle in his chest like coals coming to life. This was Shaw's work. Had to be. A warning. A reminder that the debt was due in 11 days, and Shaw had ways of making life difficult for those who didn't pay on time. He spent the morning dragging the carcasses away from the water source, then rode the fence line checking for breaks. Found 2 places where wire had been cut, fence posts pulled loose. More of Shaw's handiwork. The man was systematic in his cruelty, didn't do enough damage to be called sabotage, just enough to cost time and money and sleep. By noon, Jacob's hands were raw from fence work, and his shirt was soaked with sweat. He returned to the house to find Eleanor had transformed the kitchen. The floor was scrubbed clean. The dishes were organized on shelves. The windows had been washed until they actually let light through. And there was food on the table. Real food. Cornbread and beans with salt pork. Potatoes fried with wild onions she must have found growing by the creek. Jacob washed his hands at the pump, sat down without speaking. Eleanor served him, then served herself. They ate in silence, the only sound the scrape of spoons on plates and Billy's soft snoring from the bedroom. "Found some problems this morning," Jacob said finally. "Cattle killed, fence cut." Eleanor's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. "Shaw's men." "Probably." Jacob took another bite, chewed thoughtfully. "They're sending a message, making sure I know they're watching. What will you do?" "Keep working. Keep Billy safe. Keep you safe." Jacob met her eyes across the table. "And figure out how to come up with $350 in 11 days. Eleanor set down her spoon. "I can help with that." Jacob almost laughed. "Not cruel, just reflexive. No offense, but I don't see how." Eleanor's expression didn't change. Her voice stayed level, factual. "I have skills. Medical skills. Herbalism. My grandmother taught me before she died. I can make remedies. Treat common ailments. People will pay for that. Doc Morrison already does that. Doc Morrison is 70 years old and half blind." Eleanor leaned forward slightly. "I'm young. I can ride to homesteads, make house calls, treat women and children who won't come to town. There's money in that if I work it right." Jacob studied her. This wasn't the desperate woman from the platform. This was someone who'd thought through survival strategies and was presenting them like a business plan. "You'd do that?" he asked. "Ride around the county treating strangers? I'd do that to help save a ranch I'm now living on." Eleanor's voice held an edge. "And to help keep a little boy safe. Besides, what else am I going to do? Sit here and wait for Shaw to burn us out?" She had a point, and Jacob was desperate enough to consider options he'd normally reject out of pride. "All right," he said, "but you don't go alone, not yet. Not until we know Shaw's men aren't going to bother you. Then come with me the first few times." Eleanor started clearing plates. "Introduce me to your neighbors. Let them see I'm respectable. That I'm your wife." The word wife hung in the air between them. They'd been careful not to use it until now. But that's what the papers said, what the law recognized, what the whole county would assume. "We'll start tomorrow," Jacob said. "Patterson Place is closest. His wife Grace might know who needs doctoring." Eleanor nodded, satisfied. "Then tomorrow we start earning money." That afternoon, while Billy slept and Eleanor worked in what remained of the garden, Jacob sat on the porch cleaning his rifle. It was meditative work, the kind that let his mind wander while his hands stayed busy. He thought about Shaw, about the debt, about the fact that even if Eleanor's plan worked, even if they earned some money from her medical skills, it wouldn't be enough. Not in 11 days. They'd need a miracle or a windfall or both. The sound of hoofbeats pulled him from his thoughts. 3 riders approaching from the east, moving slow and deliberate. Jacob recognized them even at a distance. "Shaw's men." "Eleanor," he called, "get inside. Don't come out unless I tell you." She appeared from around the corner of the house, dirt on her skirts and a trowel in her hand. "Them." "Yeah." Jacob stood, rifle now in hand, but pointed at the ground. "Remember what I said. Stay inside. Don't open the door." Eleanor's jaw tightened. She nodded once, then disappeared into the house. Jacob heard the bolt slide home on the kitchen door. The 3 men rode into the yard like they owned it. The leader was Danny Brennan Shaw's enforcer, a big man with a red beard and mean eyes. The other 2 were hired muscle names Jacob didn't know and didn't care to learn. Brennan dismounted with the casual confidence of someone who'd never been told no in his life. He smiled, showing too many teeth. "Cole, nice day for ranch work. State your business, Brennan." Jacob's voice was flat, empty of emotion. "Just checking on Mr. Shaw's investment." Brennan's smile widened, making sure his collateral is being properly maintained. "The ranch isn't Shaw's yet being the key word." Brennan walked closer, boots crunching on the dry earth. 11 days, Cole." Then it's ours, unless you've got $350 hiding somewhere. I'll have it. Will you? Brennan glanced around the yard, taking in the struggling garden, the barn that needed repairs, the obvious signs of poverty. Doesn't look like a profitable operation to me. Looks can deceive. That they can. Brennan's gaze shifted to the house. For instance, I heard you took yourself a wife, one of those mail-order women. Didn't think you had it in you, Cole. Not after the way you mourned the first one. Jacob's grip on the rifle tightened. His knuckles went white. Leave Sarah out of this. Brennan held up his hands in mock surrender. No disrespect to the dead, just curious about the living. This new wife of yours, she inside? That's none of your concern. Everything on this property is my concern, or will be in 11 days. Brennan took another step forward. Shaw wants to know if you're planning to run. Some men, do you know, get desperate, take what they can carry and ride for the border. I'm not running. Good. Because Shaw also wants me to remind you that running would be breach of contract. And breach of contract carries consequences. Brennan's voice dropped lower, more menacing. For everyone living on the property. The threat was clear. If Jacob ran, Shaw would take it out on whoever remained. Meaning Billy. Meaning Eleanor. Tell Shaw I'll have his money, Jacob said. And tell him to keep his men off my land until then. This is still my property for 11 more days. For now. Brennan mounted his horse, settling into the saddle with deliberate slowness. But accidents happen, Cole. Fences break. Cattle wander. Buildings catch fire. All kinds of misfortune can befall a man who doesn't pay his debts on time. Is that a threat? That's reality. Brennan turned his horse. See you soon, Cole. Real soon. The three men rode off, kicking up dust that settled over everything like prophecy. Jacob watched until they disappeared over the ridge, then finally let himself breathe. The door opened behind him. Eleanor stepped out, still holding the trowel like a weapon. That was Brennan, she asked. Yeah. He's worse than I thought. Jacob glanced at her. How much did you hear? All of it. Eleanor moved to stand beside him on the porch. He threatened us. Threatened Billy. He threatened everybody. That's what Shaw's men do. They threaten and intimidate and make sure you know they're always watching. Eleanor's grip on the trowel tightened. Then we need to work faster, earn more, find a way. Jacob appreciated her determination. But he'd been fighting Shaw for 3 years now. He knew how this ended. Shaw always got what he wanted. The only question was how much pain he'd inflict along the way. There might be another option, Jacob said quietly. Something I've been considering. Eleanor waited. Shaw runs a poker game every Saturday night. Big stakes. Men have won hundreds of dollars in a single night. And lost the same. You want to gamble? Eleanor's voice was sharp. Risk what little we have. I want to win. Jacob turned to face her. I'm good at reading people. Always have been. And Shaw's arrogant. Makes mistakes when he thinks he's winning. That's not a plan. That's desperation. You got a better idea? Jacob's voice rose slightly. Because I'm open to suggestions. But unless you can cure 11 different people of 11 different ailments and charge them $30 each in the next 11 days, we're running out of options. Eleanor flinched. Then her expression hardened. Fine. Go play cards with the man who wants to take everything from you. Bet the ranch on the turn of a card. But if you lose, don't expect me to pick up the pieces. She strode back into the house, leaving Jacob alone on the porch with his anger and his rifle and his growing certainty that he was going to destroy everything he touched. The next morning, Jacob and Eleanor rode to the Patterson place in cold silence. Billy had stayed home under the watch of young Tom Patterson, Robert and Grace's 16-year-old son, who'd come over at dawn to help with chores in exchange for learning ranch work. The Patterson house was modest but well-maintained. Robert Patterson ran 200 acres of decent grazing land and had managed to avoid Shaw's predatory lending. He was one of the few men in the county Jacob still considered a friend. Grace Patterson met them at the door with the expression of a woman who'd heard gossip and drawn conclusions. She was in her early 40s, handsome in a severe way, with gray streaking her dark hair. "Jacob," she said, And this must be your bride, Eleanor Harper Cole." Eleanor said, extending her hand. "Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Patterson." Grace took the hand, but her grip was perfunctory. News travels fast in these parts. Whole counties talking about Jacob Cole taking the woman nobody wanted. Eleanor's spine straightened. Then the whole county has too much time on their hands. Grace's eyebrows rose. She studied Eleanor with new interest. "Well, at least you've got spine. You'll need it married to Jacob." "We're here on business," Jacob said, cutting through the tension. "Eleanor has medical training, herbal remedies. We thought maybe you'd know of folks who might need her services." Grace crossed her arms. "What kind of medical training?" "My grandmother was a healer," Eleanor said. "Cherokee medicine mixed with what she learned from frontier doctors. I know how to treat fevers, infections, women's complaints, childhood illnesses. I can set bones if needed, and I can make remedies from plants most doctors ignore." "Can you treat the flux?" Grace asked. "Mrs. Wilson's youngest has been sick for a week. Doc Morrison gave her something, but it's not working. I can try." Eleanor's voice was confident. "I'll need to see the child first, assess the symptoms. But yes, I've treated similar cases before." Grace considered this. Then, "Come inside, have coffee, we'll talk." The kitchen was warm and smelled of bread baking. Grace poured coffee with the efficiency of someone who'd done it 10,000 times. They sat around a scarred wooden table that had probably been there since the house was built. "How much would you charge?" Grace asked. "For treating Mrs. Wilson's child?" "Whatever she can afford," Eleanor said. "If she's got money, fine. If not, I'll take payment in trade. Eggs, vegetables, whatever she can spare." Grace's expression softened slightly. "That's generous. That's survival." Eleanor met her gaze steadily. "We're all trying to get by out here. No sense in being unreasonable about payment." Grace sipped her coffee, studying Eleanor over the rim of her cup. "You're not what I expected. What did you expect?" "Someone broken. Someone desperate enough to take any man who'd have her." Grace's bluntness was startling. "But you don't seem broken. Just determined." "I am determined." Eleanor's voice was calm. "Determined to build something here. Determined to help Jacob keep his ranch. Determined to make sure Billy grows up safe. The boy's lucky to have you." Grace glanced at Jacob. "You both are." Jacob didn't respond, just drank his coffee and let the women talk. Grace pulled out a piece of paper, started writing names and locations. "Here, 5 families that might need your help. Start with the Wilsons, they're closest. After that, try the Hendersons. Their eldest daughter is pregnant with her first and nervous about it." "Thank you," Eleanor said, taking the paper. "Don't thank me yet." Grace's voice turned serious. "You should know that Shaw's been asking questions about Jacob's new wife, wanting to know where you came from, what your situation is, why Jacob asked. Because Shaw likes to know everything about the people he's squeezing." Grace looked between them. "And because he's vindictive. He doesn't like it when his plans get complicated. You getting married complicated his plans to take your ranch without resistance." "How so?" Eleanor asked. "Because now if he forecloses, he's not just throwing out a stubborn bachelor. He's throwing out a family. That plays differently with the community, makes him look worse." Grace leaned forward. "Shaw cares about appearances, about being seen as a legitimate businessman. A family being displaced hurts that image." "So, we're a complication," Jacob said. "You're a target." Grace's voice was grave. "Shaw doesn't like complications. He eliminates them. You two need to watch yourselves, especially you, Eleanor. Shaw's men aren't above intimidating women if they think it'll get results." "I can handle intimidation," Eleanor said. "I've handled worse." "Have you handled Danny Brennan?" Grace's expression turned grim. "Because that man's got a reputation. Women avoid him, and for good reason." Jacob felt something cold settle in his stomach. What kind of reputation? The kind that ends with women not wanting to talk about what happened to them. Grace stood, refilled her coffee cup. "Just be careful, both of you. Shaw's playing for keeps, and he doesn't play fair." They left the Patterson place with a list of potential patients and a weight of new worry. As they rode toward the Wilson homestead, Eleanor spoke without looking at Jacob. "This Brennan," she said, Is he the one who was at your ranch yesterday? Yeah. Eleanor nodded slowly. Then I'll be ready if he comes again. Ready. How Eleanor pulled aside her shawl, slightly revealing a small pistol tucked into her belt. Jacob's eyes widened. Where did you get that? Brought it with me. Eleanor adjusted the shawl back into place. When you've been hurt enough times, you learn to carry protection. Do you know how to use it? Well enough? Her voice was matter-of-fact. Point the dangerous end at what you want to stop. Pull the trigger. Don't close your eyes. Jacob found himself revising his assessment of Eleanor Harper Cole yet again. She wasn't just determined. She was armed and prepared to defend herself. That changed calculations he hadn't known he was making. The Wilson homestead was in worse shape than Jacob's ranch. The house leaned to one side, and the barn had partially collapsed. 3 children played in the dirt yard, all of them too thin and wearing clothes that had been patched until there was more patch than original fabric. Mrs. Wilson appeared in the doorway, a gaunt woman who looked far older than she probably was. Her eyes were suspicious and tired. "Help you?" she asked. "Mrs. Wilson?" Jacob said, dismounting. "This is my wife, Eleanor. Grace Patterson said your youngest is sick. Eleanor has some medical training. Thought she might be able to help." Mrs. Wilson's expression flickered between hope and suspicion. "Can't pay much." "Don't need much," Eleanor said, dismounting as well. "Can I see the child?" Mrs. Wilson hesitated, then nodded. Inside. The interior of the house was dark and smelled of poverty and sickness. A small girl, maybe 5 years old, lay on a pallet in the corner. Her face was pale, her breathing shallow. A bucket beside her contained evidence of the flux Grace had mentioned. Eleanor knelt beside the child, placed her hand on the girl's forehead, asked questions in a gentle voice. How long has she been sick? What has she eaten? Has there been blood in her stools? Wilson answered each question, her voice shaking slightly. The girl had been sick for 8 days. The flux came and went. Doc Morrison's medicine hadn't helped. She was getting weaker. Eleanor opened the bag she'd brought, pulled out several small packets of dried herbs. She explained what each one was. Golden seal for infection, slippery elm for inflammation, peppermint for nausea. She mixed them carefully, showing Mrs. Wilson how to prepare the tea. 3 times a day, Eleanor instructed. And keep her drinking water. The flux will dehydrate her. That's what kills most children, not the sickness itself, but the lack of water. Mrs. Wilson took the packets with trembling hands. "How much do you have eggs?" Eleanor asked. "Some. 12 eggs, or whatever you can spare. And if this works, maybe tell your neighbors. I'll be making rounds through the county treating folks who need it." Mrs. Wilson nodded, relief flooding her face. "God bless you." They left with the promise of eggs to be collected in a week. As they rode toward the Henderson place, Eleanor was quiet, lost in thought. "You did good back there," Jacob said. "I hope so." Eleanor glanced back toward the Wilson house. "That little girl is very sick. If the remedies don't work quickly, she'll die. Then we pray they work." "Do you pray, Jacob?" Eleanor's question was genuine, not mocking. "Not since Sarah and Rose." Jacob kept his eyes on the trail ahead. "Figured God stopped listening to me around then. Maybe he's listening and you're not hearing the answers." Jacob didn't respond. He'd stopped believing in a God who answered prayers the day he'd buried his daughter. Whatever power ran the universe, it wasn't interested in the suffering of small people in hard places. They visited 3 more homesteads that day. At each one, Eleanor assessed the situation, provided remedies or advice, and accepted payment in whatever form the family could offer. By evening, they had 24 eggs, a sack of potatoes, a jar of honey, and $3 in actual money. It wasn't $350, but it was a start. That night, after Billy had gone to sleep and Eleanor had retreated to her room, Jacob sat on the porch and counted the money. $3. Plus whatever they'd get from selling eggs and trading potatoes. Maybe another $5 if they were lucky. $8 in one day. If they could maintain that pace, they'd have $88 by the time the debt came due. Still $262 short. The math was simple and brutal. Eleanor's plan wouldn't save them. which meant Jacob's plan, the desperate card game with Shaw, was looking more and more like the only option. He thought about Sarah, about the promises he'd made to her before she died, to keep the ranch, to build something lasting, to honor her memory by refusing to give up. He was about to gamble away everything she'd wanted, on the turn of a card, against a man who'd been waiting 3 years for Jacob to fail. The weight of it settled on his shoulders like stones, but there was no other way, not one he could see. Inside the house, Eleanor moved around in her room. He heard the bolt slide home on her door, heard her settling in for the night. She'd worked hard today, had given hope to sick children and exhausted mothers, had asked for almost nothing in return. She deserved better than this, better than a desperate man and a failing ranch and a future measured in days. But she was here, and that meant Jacob had to protect her along with everything else he was trying to protect. Had to make sure that when Shaw came for the ranch, Eleanor had somewhere to go, some way to survive what was coming. He would play cards with Shaw, would risk everything on a gamble, and if he lost, he'd make sure Eleanor and Billy got away clean. That was the best he could offer, the only promise he could make. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to the struggles of men. Jacob sat and watched them until exhaustion finally drove him inside up the ladder to his loft, where he lay awake wondering what Sarah would say if she could see him now. Probably something about having faith, about trusting that things would work out. But Sarah had trusted too, had had faith, and she'd died anyway along with their daughter while Jacob had stood helpless and useless and full of rage at a God who didn't listen. Faith was for people who hadn't buried their families, for people who still believed in happy endings. Jacob Cole knew better. Morning came with trouble. Jacob woke to the sound of Billy screaming. He was down the ladder and across the room before full consciousness had settled in. Found Billy standing at the kitchen window pointing outside with a shaking hand. The chicken coop was on fire. Jacob ran outside in his bare feet, grabbed the bucket by the pump, started throwing water on the flames. But the coop was old, dry wood, and it burned fast. By the time he'd gotten the fire under control, half the structure was gone, and most of the chickens had scattered into the prairie. Eleanor appeared with Billy behind her. She surveyed the damage with a grim expression. "Accident?" she asked. Jacob pointed to the ground. Boot prints, too large to be his, fresh. Someone had been here in the night, had set the fire deliberately and left. Brennan, Eleanor said. It wasn't a question, or one of his men. Jacob kicked at the charred wood. This is how they operate. Small fires, small damages. Never enough to be worth involving the law, but enough to cost money and time and sleep. What do? We rebuild. Eleanor's voice was steady. And we keep working. We don't let them scare us into running. Jacob looked at her. She stood with Billy tucked against her side, her hand on the boy's shoulder. She'd been here less than 3 days, and she was already using words like we and us, already treating this failing ranch like something worth fighting for. "Why are you doing this?" Jacob asked. "You could leave. Go back to town. Tell Harwick the arrangement didn't work out. Start over somewhere else." Eleanor met his eyes. "I could, but I won't." "Why not?" "Because Billy needs someone who won't abandon him. And because you need someone who will stand with you instead of running away when things get hard." Eleanor's voice was matter-of-fact. "Besides, I've got nowhere else to go. This is it for me. Same as it is for you." Jacob felt something shift in his chest. Not love, not yet, but recognition. They were the same, he and Eleanor. Both refugees from lives that hadn't worked out. Both fighting for survival in a place that didn't care if they lived or died. "We'll rebuild the coop today," he said. "Tomorrow, you keep making your rounds. Build up your reputation as a healer. Every dollar helps." Eleanor nodded. "And the card game Saturday night, 3 days from now." Jacob's jaw tightened. "I'll need to be in town by evening. That means you and Billy will be alone here. We'll manage. Brennan might come back." Eleanor's hand moved to where Jacob knew she kept the pistol. "Then Brennan will get a surprise." Jacob wanted to argue, wanted to tell her that facing down Shaw's men was different than carrying a gun for protection, that men like Brennan didn't respect women with weapons, they saw them as challenges to be overcome. But he also knew Eleanor wouldn't listen. She'd made her choice. She was staying. She was fighting. And nothing he said would change that. They spent the morning salvaging what they could of the chicken coop and rounding up the scattered birds. By noon they'd recovered 8 chickens out of 20. The rest were gone either dead in the fire or scattered so far into the prairie they'd never find them again. Billy worked alongside them without complaint, his small hands carrying wood and nails and doing whatever was asked. The fever had left him weaker, but he was determined to help, to prove he was useful. Eleanor watched the boy with an expression Jacob couldn't quite read. Fondness, maybe? Or recognition? Maybe she saw herself in Billy's determination not to be a burden. By evening they had a rough structure that would keep the surviving chickens safe until they could build something better. Jacob's hands were raw and his back ached, but the work had been good. Had given him something to focus on besides the debt and the card game and the growing certainty that everything was about to fall apart. That night, after Billy had fallen asleep, Eleanor appeared on the porch where Jacob sat cleaning his rifle. She'd changed into a nightgown with a shawl wrapped around her shoulders. Her hair was down for the first time since he'd met her, falling in dark waves past her shoulders. "Can't sleep?" Jacob asked. "Too much thinking?" Eleanor sat down beside him, careful to maintain distance. "About Saturday. About the card game." "What about it?" "If you lose," Eleanor said carefully, "what happens to us?" "To Billy and me." Jacob set down the rifle. "You go to Patterson's place. Robert will take you in until you can make other arrangements. I've already talked to him about it. You planned for failure. I planned for reality." Jacob's voice was harder than he intended. "Shaw has wanted this land for 3 years. He's got resources I don't have. Connections I don't have. The odds of me winning against him in a card game at his own table are not good. Then why play? Because it's the only chance we have." Jacob turned to look at her. "Your healing work is good. It's valuable. But it's not going to earn $350 in 3 days. The card game might, or it might cost us everything. We've got nothing to lose that Shaw won't take anyway." Jacob's voice dropped lower. "At least this way there's a chance. A small one, but a chance." Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. "Then teach me. Teach you how to play, how to read people the way you do. If you're going to risk everything on cards, I should at least understand what you're risking it on." Jacob studied her face in the moonlight. She was serious, genuinely wanted to learn. "All right," he said. "Let's go inside. I'll show you." They spent the next 2 hours at the kitchen table with a battered deck of cards Sarah had bought years ago. Jacob explained the basics of poker, the hierarchy of hands, the art of betting, the psychology of knowing when to fold and when to press. Eleanor absorbed it all with the focused intensity she brought to everything, asked questions that showed she understood not just the rules, but the strategy beneath them. "Shaw has a tell," Jacob said, as they played their 5th practice hand. "When he's got something good, he taps his fingers twice on the table. When he's bluffing, he doesn't move at all. How do you know I've watched him play?" "Before Sarah died, I used to go to town more often. Saw Shaw at cards a few times. He's good, but he's arrogant, thinks nobody notices his patterns." Eleanor laid down her cards a straight that beat Jacob's 2-pair. "If you know his tell, why haven't you played against him before? Because I never had a stake worth risking." Jacob gathered the cards. "Until now. And now you're going to bet the ranch." "Not the ranch. The debt. If I win, Shaw forgives what I owe. If I lose, he gets the ranch immediately instead of waiting 3 more days. That's not better, Jacob. That's just faster failure." Jacob met her eyes across the table. "Sometimes fast failure is better than slow suffering. At least this way we'll know. One way or the other, by Sunday morning we'll know if we have a future here." Eleanor's expression was unreadable. Then, "Don't lose." "I'll try not to." "No." Eleanor's voice was fierce. "Don't lose, because I'm just starting to believe this might work. This ranch, this life, Billy getting better, us building something. Don't take that away before we've even had a chance to try." Jacob felt something crack inside his chest. Some wall he'd built after Sarah died. Some protection against caring too much about outcomes he couldn't control. "I won't lose," he said, and meant it, or at least meant that he'd try his damnedest not to. Eleanor nodded, satisfied, then stood. "I should sleep. Big day tomorrow. More houses to visit," Eleanor Jacob said as she turned to go. She stopped, looked back. "Thank you. For caring. About the ranch. About Billy. About any of this." Eleanor's expression softened slightly. "We're in this together now, Jacob, like it or not. Your problems are my problems. Your future is my future. So yes, I care." She disappeared into her room, the bolt sliding home with its now familiar sound. Jacob sat alone at the kitchen table, cards spread in front of him, and tried to remember the last time someone had said, "We're in this together." Sarah had said it early in their marriage, before Rose was born, before the ranch had started failing, before disease and debt and despair had ground them down. Now Eleanor said it, and somehow hearing it from her carried different weight, because Eleanor knew what she was getting into, had seen the worst already, and chosen to stay anyway. Jacob gathered the cards, put them back in their box. Saturday night he'd play the game of his life, against Shaw, for the ranch, for Billy, for Eleanor, for all their futures. He climbed to his loft and lay down, but sleep was a long time coming. When it finally arrived, he dreamed of Sarah standing at the edge of the creek watching him with sad eyes. In the dream, she spoke only once, "Don't lose yourself trying to save what's already gone." He woke with those words echoing in his head, wondering if they were Sarah's wisdom or his own subconscious telling him the truth he didn't want to hear. Either way, Saturday was coming, and when it did, everything would change. Saturday came with the weight of Judgment Day. Jacob woke before dawn, his stomach tight with anticipation and dread. Today, he would ride into Millerton and play cards with Raymond Shaw. Today, he would either save the ranch or lose everything. He found Eleanor already awake in the kitchen making coffee with hands that moved too precisely, the kind of precision that came from forcing calm over fear. Billy sat at the table picking at a piece of bread. The boy's eyes were red-rimmed like he'd been crying and trying to hide it. "You're really going?" Billy asked when Jacob sat down. "Have to." Jacob accepted the coffee Eleanor poured. "It's the only way. What if you don't come back?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Jacob wanted to promise he'd return, wanted to tell Billy that everything would be fine, but he'd learned years ago that lies didn't protect children. They just made the truth hurt worse when it arrived. "If I don't come back by midnight," Jacob said carefully, "you and Miss Eleanor go to the Patterson place. Stay there until you hear from me." Billy's lower lip trembled. "I don't want you to go." "I know." Jacob reached across the table, squeezed the boy's small hand. "But sometimes we have to do things we don't want to do, things that scare us. That's what being a man means." "You sound like Pa." Billy's voice was barely a whisper. "He said that too, right before he died." The words hit Jacob like a physical blow. Billy's father had been his brother, had been a good man before whiskey and grief had hollowed him out. Jacob had watched his brother's slow suicide, powerless to stop it, and had sworn he'd never let the same thing happen to Billy. Now he was riding off to gamble with a man who'd been engineering his destruction for 3 years, leaving Billy and Eleanor alone and vulnerable, doing exactly what his brother had done in a way, choosing a desperate path and hoping it didn't end in disaster. "I'm not your pa," Jacob said finally, "and I'm coming back. Promise." Jacob looked into Billy's eyes and lied. "I promise." Eleanor walked with him to the barn while Billy watched from the porch. She helped him saddle Ash, her movements efficient and practiced. She'd been on the ranch less than a week but already moved through its spaces like she belonged. "You don't have to do this," she said quietly. "We could run, all 3 of us. Head west. Start over somewhere Shaw can't reach. Running won't change the debt." Jacob cinched the saddle tight. "Shaw has legal claim. He could follow us anywhere, have us arrested for theft if we take anything that's technically his collateral. Then let him have the ranch." Eleanor's voice was urgent. "It's just land, Jacob. Just buildings. We can build again somewhere else. It's not just land." Jacob turned to face her. "It's Sarah's dream, Rose's memory. It's the only thing I have left of them. If I give it up without fighting, it means they suffered for nothing. They're dead, Jacob." Eleanor's words were harsh, but her tone was gentle. "You can't honor the dead by destroying the living. Billy needs you. I need you. More than some piece of ground needs protecting." Jacob felt something twist in his chest. When had Eleanor started saying she needed him? When had this arrangement of convenience become something that mattered? "I'm coming back," he said. "And I'm bringing good news. Shaw's going to lose tonight. I can feel it." Eleanor stepped closer. Close enough that he could smell the soap she'd used, the faint scent of herbs from her morning work. Her eyes searched his face, looking for truth or lies or hope. "If you don't come back," she said softly, "I'll know you tried. That counts for something." Then she did something unexpected. She rose on her toes and kissed his cheek. Brief, chaste, but deliberate. "For luck," she said. "Now go win." Jacob mounted Ash, his cheek still warm where Eleanor's lips had been. He looked down at her, this woman who'd become essential in a matter of days, and tried to memorize the moment. Just in case. "Keep the rifle loaded," he said. "Keep Billy inside. And if Brennan comes, don't hesitate." "I won't." Eleanor's hand moved to where Jacob knew she kept her pistol. "We'll be here when you get back." Jacob rode away without looking back. If he'd looked back, he might have lost his nerve, might have turned around and chosen safety over honor. But looking back was a luxury men like him couldn't afford. The ride to Millerton took 3 hours. Jacob used the time to prepare himself, ran through card combinations in his head, thought about Shaw's, tells his patterns, his weaknesses. Arrogance was Shaw's biggest flaw. The man believed himself untouchable, believed he was smarter than everyone else. Tonight, Jacob would use that arrogance against him. Millerton in late afternoon looked like any other frontier town. False front buildings baking in the heat. A few people moving slowly through the dusty streets. The saloon at the far end already showing signs of evening life with horses tied outside and music drifting through the swinging doors. Jacob stabbed Ash at the livery, paid 2 bits for feed and water. Then he walked to Doc Morrison's house and knocked. Doc answered, squinting through his spectacles. "Cole, didn't expect to see you today. Need a favor." Jacob handed Doc a sealed envelope. "If I'm not back by dawn, give this to Eleanor Harper Cole, and tell her to take Billy to the Patterson place." Doc took the envelope with a grave expression. "You're playing with Shaw tonight." It wasn't a question. News traveled fast in small towns. Of course Doc knew. "Yeah." Jacob adjusted his hat. "It's the only move I have left. Shaw doesn't lose Cole, not at cards, not at anything." Doc's voice was heavy. "He cheats when he has to, and when he doesn't cheat, he's just better than everyone else. Then I'll have to be better than better." Jacob started to turn away, then stopped. "Doc, if something happens to me, look after Eleanor and Billy. Please, they'll be taken care of." Doc's eyes were sad. "But Jacob, you've got to know this is fool's errand. Shaw wants your land. He's not going to let a card game stand between him and what he wants. We'll see." Jacob walked away before Doc could say anything else. The saloon was called the Brass Rail, and it smelled of whiskey and tobacco and unwashed men. Jacob pushed through the doors at exactly 7 o'clock, the time Shaw's games always started. The main room was crowded with drinkers and gamblers, but Jacob's attention went straight to the back, where a private room stood with its door guarded by one of Shaw's men. Jacob approached. "I'm here for the game." The guard looked him up and down with undisguised contempt. "You got a stake. I got the deed to my ranch." The guard's eyebrows rose. He knocked on the door, spoke through it in low tones, then stepped aside. "Mr. Shaw says you can play." The back room was quieter, the air thick with cigar smoke. A round table dominated the space, surrounded by leather chairs. 5 men sat waiting, drinks at their elbows and cards in their hands. Raymond Shaw sat at the head of the table like a king on a throne. He was a handsome man in his early 40s, with dark hair going silver at the temples and eyes the color of river ice. He wore an expensive suit that had been tailored in Dallas, or maybe even further east. Everything about him screamed money and power and absolute confidence. "Cole." Shaw's smile didn't reach his eyes. "What a pleasant surprise. I didn't think you'd have the stones to show up." Jacob sat in the empty chair across from Shaw, pulled the deed to his ranch from his vest pocket, and laid it on the table. "My stake." The other 4 players looked at each other nervously. They were local businessmen, comfortable and well-fed. Men who played for entertainment, not survival. "That's quite a stake," Shaw said, examining the deed without touching it. "What do you expect to win?" "Forgiveness of my debt." Jacob's voice was steady. "All of it. $350. And you stay off my land permanently." Shaw's smile widened. "Ambitious. And if you lose?" "You get the ranch. Immediately. No waiting 3 more days." Shaw leaned back in his chair, clearly delighted. He tapped his fingers on the table twice that Tell Jacob had noticed years ago. The man already thought he'd won. "Gentlemen," Shaw said to the other players, "I think we're about to witness either the greatest bluff or the greatest folly in Millerton history. Either way, it should be entertaining." The game began. For the first hour, Jacob played conservatively, folded more than he bet, lost small amounts but nothing significant. He watched Shaw carefully cataloging every gesture, every pattern. The finger tap when Shaw had good cards, the absolute stillness when he was bluffing, the way his eyes shifted left before he raised. The other players dropped out one by one as the stakes climbed too high for their comfort. By 9 o'clock it was just Jacob and Shaw with a pile of money and the deed to Jacob's ranch sitting between them like a battlefield. "You're better than I expected," Shaw admitted, dealing a new hand. "But you're still going to lose, Cole. You always lose." "It's what you do." "We'll see." Jacob picked up his cards. 3 sevens. Not bad, but not great. He watched Shaw's face as the man examined his own hand. There, the finger tap. Twice. Quick. Shaw had something good. Jacob called Shaw's bet, then raised, pushed more money into the center. Shaw matched it without hesitation. The turn card came. A 7. Jacob now had 4 of a kind, one of the strongest hands possible, but he kept his face blank, gave nothing away. Shaw studied Jacob's expression, looking for tells. Finding none, he tapped his fingers again, then pushed all his money to the center of the table. "All in," Shaw said. "Your deed against my pot. Winner takes everything." Jacob looked at the pile of money. Had to be close to $500, more than enough to clear his debt and have money left over. But if he lost, it was over. The ranch gone. Eleanor and Billy homeless. Everything Sarah had worked for dissolved in a single hand. He thought about Eleanor's kiss on his cheek, her voice saying, "We're in this together." Billy's small hand in his, trusting him to come back. Jacob pushed the deed into the center of the table. "I call." Shaw's smile turned triumphant. He laid down his cards with a flourish. Full house. Kings over 8s. The other men who'd been watching from the sidelines murmured appreciation. It was a strong hand, strong enough to win most games. Jacob laid down his cards one at a time. 7, 7, 7, 7. 4 of a kind. The room went silent. Shaw's face drained of color. He stared at the cards like they'd personally betrayed him. "I believe that's my pot," Jacob said calmly. He reached for the money and the deed. Shaw's hand shot out, grabbed Jacob's wrist. His grip was iron hard. His eyes had gone from ice to fire. "You cheated," Shaw said. His voice was low, dangerous. "You had to have cheated." "I played the cards I was dealt." Jacob met Shaw's gaze without flinching. "Same as you." "I just played them better." Shaw's other hand moved to his vest where Jacob knew he kept a derringer. The air in the room turned electric with potential violence. Then the door opened. Doc Morrison stepped through, followed by Sheriff Tom Hastings and 2 deputies. All 3 lawmen had their hands on their guns. "Heard there was a high-stakes game tonight," the sheriff said. His voice was casual, but his eyes were sharp. "Just wanted to make sure everything was above board." Shaw released Jacob's wrist slowly. His face rearranged itself into something resembling civility. "Everything's fine, Sheriff. Just a friendly game. Looked like it might be getting unfriendly." The sheriff moved to the table, glanced at the cards. 4 sevens beats a full house. That's a legal win, Mr. Shaw." Shaw's jaw clenched so hard Jacob heard teeth grinding. "He knows it's legal," Shaw bit out. "He also knows he just made a powerful enemy." Shaw leaned closer, his voice a venomous whisper. "You think you've won? You took everything from me, Cole. First Sarah, now this." Jacob's blood went cold. "What did you say?" "Sarah was mine first." Shaw's eyes glittered with old hatred. "We were engaged. Did she ever tell you that, before she met you at that church social? She chose a dirt farmer over a businessman, chose poverty over comfort. And for what? To die in a shack coughing up blood while you stood there useless." Jacob's fist clenched. The pieces suddenly fell into place. Why Shaw had been so eager to lend money when Sarah was sick. Why he'd sent an incompetent doctor instead of a good one. Why he'd spent 3 years systematically destroying Jacob. This wasn't about debt. It had never been about debt. This was revenge. "You let her die," Jacob said, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. "You could have sent a real doctor. You could have saved her, but you wanted me to suffer." Shaw's smile was cold as a January wind. "I wanted you to know what it felt like, to lose everything, the way I lost her to you." Jacob gathered the money, and the deed stood up. The debts cleared Shaw. "Stay off my land, and keep your men away from my family." Shaw leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper only Jacob could hear. "Brennan's already there, Cole. I sent him hours ago. By now your new wife has probably learned what happens to women who stand between Raymond Shaw and what he wants." Jacob's blood turned to ice. His hand moved to his gun before conscious thought caught up. But the sheriff's voice cut through the rage. "Wouldn't do that, Cole." The sheriff's gun was out now, pointed at the floor but ready. "You won fair and square. Don't ruin it by getting arrested for assault." Jacob forced his hand away from the gun, forced himself to breathe. Shaw was smiling now, enjoying Jacob's panic. "You should hurry home," Shaw said. "Brennan can be so clumsy, and your house is so very flammable." Jacob ran. Out of the saloon through the streets to the livery, where he threw money at the stable boy and hauled Ash out before the boy could even respond. He mounted at a full run, kicked the horse into a gallop before he'd fully settled in the saddle. 6 miles. 6 miles between Millerton and his ranch. 6 miles that Ash could cover in maybe 40 minutes if he pushed her hard. Jacob pushed her hard. The night was clear, the moon bright enough to see by. Ash ran like she understood the urgency, her hooves pounding the packed earth in a rhythm that matched Jacob's racing heart. "Brennan's already there." Shaw's words echoed with every stride. "Your new wife has probably learned what happens." Jacob had left Eleanor and Billy alone. Had trusted that Brennan wouldn't dare attack in broad daylight, wouldn't risk the consequences of hurting a woman and child. He'd been wrong. Shaw had outplayed him after all. Not with cards, but with strategy. Shaw had let Jacob win, knowing it would distract him, knowing he'd sent Brennan to do the real damage hours ago. The miles crawled past. 4 miles. 3. Jacob could see smoke on the horizon now, black against the starlit sky. Something was burning. 2 miles. 1. The smoke was thicker, darker. Jacob could smell it now. Wood burning. Something chemical. Lamp oil, maybe. He crested the final rise and his heart stopped. His ranch was under attack. The barn was fully engulfed in flames, fire reaching 30 feet into the night sky. The house was still standing, but smoke poured from one window. 3 horses were tied by the creek, their riders nowhere visible. Jacob didn't slow down. Rode straight into the yard and off Ash before the horse had fully stopped. His gun was in his hand, his mind running cold calculations. 3 horses meant 3 men. Probably Brennan and 2 others. Where were they? The answer came in the form of a scream from inside the house. Eleanor's voice. Cut short. Then Billy's voice, high and terrified. "Let her go." Jacob hit the front door with his shoulder, smashing it open. The kitchen was full of smoke, but he could see through it. Could see Eleanor on the floor, Brennan standing over her with his hand twisted in her hair. Blood ran from Eleanor's nose. Her dress was torn at the shoulder. Billy stood between Eleanor and Brennan, a kitchen knife in his small hands, tears streaming down his face. I said, "Let her go." Billy's voice cracked. Brennan laughed. It was an ugly sound. "What's a little boy going to do with that knife?" Jacob's gun came up, pointed at Brennan's head. "Let her go. Now!" Brennan spun, still holding Eleanor's hair. His surprise lasted only a moment before it transformed into a cruel smile. "Cole, you're supposed to be in town, losing your ranch to Mr. Shaw." "I won." Jacob's voice was steady despite the rage burning in his chest. "Now let her go." "You won." Brennan's smile faltered. "But Shaw said you'd never beat him. Said you'd be gone till midnight at least." Shaw was wrong. Jacob cocked the hammer on his gun. "Last chance, Brennan. Release her or I put a bullet through your brain." Brennan's eyes darted to the doorway behind Jacob. His two men stood there, guns drawn. Jacob was outnumbered and they all knew it. "Seems like you're at a disadvantage, Cole." Brennan yanked Eleanor's hair harder, making her cry out. "Drop the gun or I'll hurt her worse." Eleanor's hand moved then, fast. She pulled the small pistol from her belt and jammed it against Brennan's leg. Pulled the trigger. The shot was deafening in the enclosed space. Brennan screamed, released. Eleanor stumbled backward. Blood spread across his thigh. Billy ran to Eleanor, helped her up. Jacob kept his gun trained on the two men in the doorway. They looked at their wounded boss, at Jacob's gun, at Eleanor's smoking pistol, and made the calculation. "We're done here," one of them said. They turned and ran. Brennan tried to follow, limping badly. Jacob could have shot him, should have shot him, but Eleanor's hand touched his arm. "Let him go," she said. Her voice was rough but firm. "Let them all go. We won." Jacob lowered his gun, watched as Brennan dragged himself outside, mounted his horse with difficulty, and rode away into the darkness. His men were already gone, just dust and hoofbeats fading into nothing. "The barn," Eleanor said. "We have to save what we can. It's gone." Jacob moved to the window, looked out at the inferno. "Nothing worth saving in there now. Let it burn out. We'll focus on keeping the house from catching." They spent the next hour hauling water from the creek, dousing the side of the house closest to the barn. Billy helped his small bucket, making trip after trip. The boy didn't cry, didn't complain, just worked. By midnight the barn had collapsed into smoldering ruins, but the house was safe. Jacob, Eleanor, and Billy sat on the porch covered in soot and ash, watching the last flames die. "You shot him," Jacob said to Eleanor. "He deserved worse." Eleanor's hand shook as she set down her pistol. "He was going to do things to me. Terrible things. Said Shaw wanted me humiliated. Broken. Said it would teach you what happens when you defy powerful men." Billy leaned against Eleanor and she wrapped her arm around him. The boy had stopped shaking, but his eyes were still too wide, seeing things children shouldn't see. Jacob wanted to go after Brennan, wanted to hunt Shaw down and make both men pay for what they'd tried to do. But Eleanor was right. They'd won. The ranch was still theirs. Shaw's debt was cleared, and everyone he cared about was alive. That was victory enough, for now. The next morning the sheriff arrived with a dozen men from town. They'd heard about the fire, come to help, but they'd also come with news. Raymond Shaw was in jail, the sheriff announced. Arrested for arson and attempted assault. Brennan's talking, trying to cut a deal. He's implicating Shaw in everything. The fires, the cattle killings, the attack on your wife. Jacob felt something release in his chest, something he'd been holding clenched for 3 years. Will it stick? With Brennan's testimony. The sheriff nodded. Shaw will hang, or spend the rest of his life in prison. Either way, he's done. The men from town helped clear the barn ruins and start rebuilding. Robert Patterson brought lumber. Grace Patterson brought food. Other neighbors Jacob barely knew showed up with tools and goodwill. By evening the ranch looked less like a battlefield and more like a construction site. Progress instead of destruction. Eleanor found Jacob standing at the edge of the property, looking out over land that was finally truly his again. She'd washed the blood from her face and changed her dress, but bruises were forming where Brennan had hit her. "You're hurt," Jacob said. "I'm alive." Eleanor stood beside him. "We're all alive. That's what matters." Jacob turned to face her fully, saw the strength in her eyes despite the bruises. This woman had shot a man to protect herself and Billy, had fought back when most women would have frozen, had stayed calm enough to help save the house from burning. She wasn't the desperate woman from the platform anymore. She was something more, something essential. Eleanor Jacob started, then stopped. Didn't know how to say what he was feeling, didn't have words for it. Eleanor smiled slightly. I know. You don't know what I was going to say. I know enough. Eleanor touched his arm gently. I know you're grateful. I know you're relieved. I know you're starting to see me as more than just an arrangement. Jacob covered her hand with his. That's more than starting. I saw it when I walked into that house and saw Brennan hurting you. I wanted to kill him, not because he was destroying my property, because he was hurting you. Eleanor's expression softened. We're a family now, Jacob, whether we planned it or not. You, me, and Billy. We've been through fire together, literally. That binds people. Is that what you want? Jacob asked. To be bound to a man who almost got you killed? To a failing ranch and a traumatized child? I want to be where I'm needed. Eleanor's voice was firm. Where I matter. And here I matter. Billy needs me. The ranch needs me. And you need me, even if you're too stubborn to say it. I need you, Jacob said. The words came easier than he'd expected. I need you, and I want you to stay. Not because of any arrangement, not because of papers or debts, but because you're supposed to be here. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. Good, because I'm not going anywhere. Jacob pulled her close, carefully avoiding her bruises. She fit against him like she'd been designed for the space. Her arms came around his waist, and they stood there as the sun set over land that had almost been lost. Billy appeared from the house, saw them embracing, and smiled. It was the first real smile Jacob had seen on the boy's face since his father died. Are you going to kiss her? Billy called out. Uncle Jake and Miss Eleanor sitting in a tree. Kissing. Jacob laughed. Actually laughed. The sound felt rusty but good. Eleanor laughed too, her body shaking against his. Get over here, boy, Jacob called. This is a family moment. Billy ran to them and they pulled him into the embrace, the three of them standing together as the last light faded and stars began to appear. Somewhere in Millerton Shaw sat in a jail cell. Brennan was probably seeing a doctor about his leg. The barn was destroyed and would take months to rebuild properly. But none of that mattered as much as this moment. Jacob had thought he'd lost everything when Sarah and Rose died, had thought that nothing good would ever happen to him again. He'd been wrong. Sometimes the things you lost made space for the things you needed. Sometimes being broken open was the only way to let new light in. The days that followed were busy with rebuilding. The men from town came back day after day until the new barn's frame was standing. Robert Patterson donated timber. Doc Morrison brought medicine for Eleanor's bruises. Even Reverend Harwick showed up, apologized for not screening Shaw more carefully before accepting him as a church member. Billy recovered from his fear slowly with Eleanor's patient care. She sat with him at night when nightmares woke him, taught him how fear was natural but didn't have to control you, showed him that being brave meant doing things even when you were scared. The boy started calling her Ma, not all the time, just occasionally when he forgot to be careful. Eleanor never corrected him, just accepted the name like it had always belonged to her. 3 weeks after the fire, Eleanor came to Jacob with news that changed everything. I need to tell you something, she said. They were in the kitchen, Billy asleep in his room. I'm late for what Jacob was reviewing the ranch accounts, trying to figure out how they'd afford winter feed. My monthly courses. Eleanor's voice was quiet. I'm 3 weeks late. That's never happened before. Jacob's head snapped up. You mean you might be pregnant? Eleanor nodded. I can't be sure yet, but maybe. The doctor I saw after Thomas divorced me said I probably couldn't conceive, said my womb was inhospitable, but maybe he was wrong, or maybe things changed. Jacob stood up cross to her, took her hands in his. His mind was racing. A child. His child. Eleanor's child. Another chance at the family he'd lost. How do you feel about that? He asked carefully. If it's true. Terrified, Eleanor admitted. What if I lose it? What if something goes wrong? What if I'm not meant to be a mother? Jacob pulled her close. You're already a mother. Billy adores you. And if there's a baby coming, we'll face it together. All of us. Eleanor held on to him tightly. I wanted to tell you before, but I wasn't sure. Didn't want to get your hopes up if I was wrong. You were right to wait. Jacob kissed the top of her head. But Eleanor, even if there's no baby, you're enough. Billy's enough. This life we're building is enough. I love you, Eleanor said. The words were simple but carried weight. I don't know when it happened. Maybe on that platform when you chose me. Maybe when you gave me a door with a lock and respected it. Maybe when you rode back here like the devil was chasing you because you were worried about us. But I love you. Jacob felt something inside him finally heal. Some wound he'd been carrying since Sarah's death that he hadn't known how to close. I love you too. And I'm grateful every day that you were the last one standing on that platform. That everyone else was too blind to see what I saw. What did you see, Strength? Honor. Someone who wouldn't quit even when the whole world was against her. Jacob cupped her face gently. Someone exactly like me. They kissed then. Not the desperate kiss of people who might lose each other, but the steady kiss of people who'd already survived the worst and knew they could survive whatever came next. That night, after the town's men had left, and Billy had finally fallen into exhausted sleep, Eleanor came to Jacob's loft. She stood at the top of the ladder, her nightgown pale in the moonlight filtering through the window. I don't want to sleep alone tonight, she said quietly. Not after everything. Jacob moved over, making space on the narrow pallet. She lay down beside him, her body warm against his. They didn't speak, didn't need to. The comfort was in the presence, in the shared breathing, in the knowledge that they'd survived together. When Jacob kissed her, it wasn't the chaste kiss from before. This was different. A question. An invitation. Eleanor answered by pulling him closer. They came together slowly, carefully, two people learning each other in the darkness. Not with the desperate passion of young lovers, but with the deliberate care of two people who'd been broken and were choosing to be whole together. Afterward, Eleanor lay with her head on Jacob's chest, listening to his heartbeat steady itself. Was that all right? Jacob asked, suddenly uncertain. Eleanor lifted her head, looked at him in the moonlight. That was us choosing each other, truly, not because of contracts or debts, but because we want to. She kissed him again, softer this time. Yes, Jacob, that was more than all right. The pregnancy confirmed itself over the following weeks. Eleanor bloomed with it, her body changing in subtle ways that made Jacob's breath catch. She was careful, mindful of the baby she carried, but she didn't stop working. Didn't stop being the backbone that held the ranch together. Winter came and went. The new barn was finished. Billy grew taller, stronger, happier. The ranch turned a small profit for the first time in 3 years. And in April of 1883, Eleanor gave birth to a daughter. They named her Rose Sarah Cole, after the daughter Jacob had lost and the wife he'd mourned. Eleanor had suggested it said the names deserved to live on in joy instead of just being buried in grief. The baby was healthy, strong-lunged and hungry with Eleanor's dark hair and Jacob's gray-green eyes. Billy was fascinated by his new sister, wanted to hold her, constantly promised he'd protect her forever. On a warm May evening, Jacob stood on the porch holding his infant daughter, while Eleanor rested inside and Billy played in the yard. The sun was setting over land that was finally thriving. Cattle grazed in the distance. The new barn stood solid and square. Everything that had been broken was being rebuilt. Doc Morrison rode up, dismounted slowly, his old bones protesting the ride. Came to check on Eleanor and the baby, he said. Make sure everything's healing proper. Come on in. Jacob led him inside where Eleanor was sitting up in bed, looking tired but radiant. Doc examined Eleanor, and the baby pronounced both of them healthy. As he was leaving, he pulled Jacob aside. You did good, Cole Doc said quietly. After Sarah and Rose died, I didn't think you'd survive it. Thought grief would eat you alive. But you found a way through. Eleanor found me, Jacob corrected. "I was just standing on that platform buying time. She's the one who made this a real family. However it happened, I'm glad." Doc mounted his horse, looked down at Jacob with serious eyes. "Raymond Shaw hanged 2 months ago. Died cursing your name and swearing vengeance from beyond the grave. Just thought you should know." Jacob felt nothing, no satisfaction, no relief, just the cold acknowledgement that a chapter had closed. Shaw's dead as they come. Doc nodded. "His properties are being sold to pay his debts. Turns out half the county owed him money, and he'd been cooking the books for years, banks seizing everything. Good. Let someone honest have it." Doc rode away, leaving Jacob alone with his thoughts. Shaw was dead. The debt was gone. The ranch was safe. And inside the house, Eleanor and Rose and Billy waited for him. Jacob went back inside, found Billy reading to Eleanor from one of the few books they owned. The boy's voice stumbled over the harder words, but Eleanor helped him patiently. Rose slept in a cradle Jacob had built from salvaged barnwood. Her tiny fist was curled near her face, her breathing soft and even. This was what Sarah had wanted: a thriving ranch, a family, something that lasted beyond hard seasons and harder times. She'd never lived to see it, but maybe wherever she was, she could see it now, could see that Jacob had kept his promise, had built something lasting from the ashes of what they'd lost. Eleanor looked up, met Jacob's eyes across the room, smiled that small private smile that said she understood what he was feeling even without words. "Come sit with us," she said. "Billy's about to read the good part." Jacob sat beside her on the bed, took her hand, listened to Billy stumble through a story about knights and dragons and people who were brave even when they were terrified. Outside, the Texas plains stretched endlessly under a darkening sky. Somewhere out there, other people were struggling with their own debts and demons and desperate choices. But here in this small house on this small ranch there was peace. Jacob Cole had been a dead man walking, had been hollowed out by loss and filled back up with nothing but determination to survive one more day. Then Eleanor Harper had stood alone on a platform while the world mocked her, and Jacob had made the only good choice he'd made in years. He'd chosen her, the woman nobody wanted, the last one standing, and she'd chosen him back, not on that platform, but later in small moments, when she'd stayed instead of running, when she'd fought Brennan instead of surrendering, when she'd held Billy through nightmares and built a garden from dead earth and believed in a future that looked impossible. They'd saved each other, not in a single dramatic moment, but day by day, choice by choice, until saving became living and living became something worth fighting for. That was the real victory, not winning the card game or defeating Shaw or keeping the ranch. The real victory was sitting on a bed with his wife and his children, listening to a story about bravery and feeling like he'd finally come home. Billy finished reading. Eleanor praised him, told him he was getting better every day. Rose stirred in her sleep, but didn't wake. "What happens next?" Billy asked. In the story, Jacob picked up the book, read the last line aloud. "And they lived," he said, not reading now but speaking from his heart day by day in the house they'd built from hope and hard work. And that was enough. Eleanor leaned her head on his shoulder. "Yeah," she said softly, "that's enough." Outside, the stars came out one by one. Inside, the fire burned low in the stove. And in between those two infinities, a family that nobody had planned held together in the darkness and called it home. That was enough.